Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I'm here with a card featuring a stencil technique with a stencil from Stencil Girl and these sentiment stamps from Right at Home shop. I really loved the bold scripty sentiments paired with the all caps font here. I thought that was a nice contrast, the way that you have that very typographical look with the handwritten look. And I know there's a lot of different stamp sets out there that have a similar look, but I really enjoy working with Nicole. She has great customer service at Right at Home shop, so I wanted to be sure to support her fun stamp line. So here I am working on some thick 110-pound cardstock from the Recollections brand at Michael's. Any thick cardstock would do for this technique. I am going to be adding a little bit of water, which is why I would avoid a thinner cardstock. Also, with the amount of inking that I'm doing, it tends to be a higher chance of like bending the cardstock when you use a lighter weight cardstock, as it doesn't hold up so much to all the abuse of really getting that ink on there and doing the blending and then adding water. But another suggestion would be to use a watercolor cardstock. You might even get a better result with that. But I wasn't completely decided what technique I would use when I started laying the color on. And I am using 3 different colors of distress ink. All were released last year. They're Mermaid Lagoon, Lucky Clover, and Wilted Violet. I like how these 3 inks are able to blend together, and they have a sort of similar tone and them being really cool but bright colors. And so when I do the further ink blending, I am actually going to make sure that I cover the blue with a paper napkin, so that way I don't get too much of the other colors mixing into it. Because if you just kind of press your hand into the wet distress ink there, then you're going to get it on your hands and you will hold it down and spread the ink. So I think the easiest thing to do is just to cover that up. I do find with the thicker cardstocks that it can be really difficult to blend or lay down enough color. So the Recollections brand is not actually my favorite for ink blending. I really like the way that the inks blend on the Distress watercolor cardstock. However, that is quite pricey in comparison, so I don't often use it. But the Canson 140-pound watercolor paper that I use pretty often does work equally as well. It is considerably cheaper. And so I'm going to make sure that my ink is completely dry, because I'm going to be doing some embossing in the next couple steps, and I don't want the stray embossing powder to stick to the distress ink. Also here, because I'm going to be reactivating it with water, I only want it where I apply the water to react the most. And so by drying it, I am guaranteeing that everything's in the same state before I go and apply the water. And so I find that it helps prevent some of the bleeding, but it's not a super big deal. So I started by just laying the Stencil Girl stencil onto my work surface and taping it down so it didn't move. It would probably be better to work on a craft mat instead of a paper grid mat that I'm using here. I just do keep the grid mat here because it's white and reflects the light a little bit better so you can see in the videos. However, something like a clear plastic sheet over it too would be helpful. And once I sprayed the water down, I did cover it with a napkin to pull some of the water up and to sort of speed up the process of wicking away that is created with distress ink, because distress ink is water reactive. Since the stencil did not cover the entire card, I did have to lift up the stencil and move it, and I was able to make sure that it covered the entire card. When I work on a background like this, I tend to make sure that my piece of cardstock is a little bit bigger than I want it to be in the finished piece, in case there's some issues around the edges or something like that. I can trim it off. So I'm going to take that stitched Lawn Fawn die and trim out my background, and then I am ready to stamp the sentiment. The idea here was that these sentiments are so beautiful, they're going to kind of be the star of the card. Like, rather than adding a critter like I often like to do, or a little scene or something like that, instead I would just let the sentiment shine and create a nice, fun, bold background for it. Because these sentiments are quite long, some of them, I did want to make sure that I got some really nice placement and that everything was lined up straight, so I am going to use my Misty tool. There is a grid on the door of the Misty which can make sure that your stamp is lined up, but also because it is a clear stamp, you can make sure that your card is centered and keep closing the door on it until you see that your cardstock is exactly where you want it. It's a kind of fussy process, but it guarantees your placement. And when you go through all the work to create a background, you don't want to mess it up when it comes time to add your sentiment. So I personally really enjoy having this tool, but I know that you can get a similar effect with a stamp positioner, like a Stamp-A-Majig or a Fiskars stamp press. But I just find that I reach for my MISTI often now that I understand some of the benefits of it. And so I also am going to be able to stamp it twice to make sure I get a great impression. I am stamping it with Onyx Black VersaFine ink. This is again a step where you want to make sure that your background is completely dry. It's more important here than it was when you were adding the water, but if you don't have the background completely dry, the embossing powder is going to stick in places you don't want it, as the Distress ink does stay wet for a while unless it is heat dried. So I sprinkled some clear embossing powder over the black and it creates the effect of black embossing. I prefer this method as often black embossing powder is just a little bit more likely to go where you don't want it. And also if you get a stray bit of clear embossing powder here and there, it's much less noticeable. So that's just my personal preference. And I like to keep it in a big tub like that because I use it so often. As I stamped the Celebrate, my MISTI came in great handy because there was a little bit of imperfection in the stamping, so being able to stamp it that second time really made for a more clear background. However, if you have a mistake like that, you could always fill it in with a Versamark pen or just a black pen at the end. If there's a little imperfection in your stamping, when you stamp in black, a little bit of pen will easily remedy any of that, and I used that tip for years before I had my MISTI and it did just fine. I wanted to add just a touch of embellishment, so I am taking these hearts from K & Company and just sort of, they're like epoxy stickers, and just giving a little visual triangle to go around the sentiment. And that is going to be it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you are interested in more crafting tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links to all of the products in the video description below. Thanks for watching. Bye.